Warning, we're going to look at some photos that some people might find disturbing. This is from the Karen Reed trial on June 3rd, and this evidence was presented through the forensic scientists. We're going to look at his clothes. You ready? This is the front of his shirt. Look at this. It is obvious from the pattern on this shirt that Officer John O'Keefe was upright while he was actively bleeding. If he'd been injured so terribly as a result of a motor vehicle accident and he landed where they found him, this is not the pattern you would see on the front of the shirt. He was upright. Here is the back of the shirt. You can see evidence of pooling, but again, if he's laying flat on his back in the snow that would absorb the blood, how is it going down here in this pattern? This is the shirt inside out, and it's hard to tell from this photograph, but some of the blood did seep through. This is another photo inside out. That's the back of the shirt, and you can see the top, back, inside out, where the blood has seeped through. Now, the only thing that makes sense is that this blood came from the big gash in the back of his head. He had no injuries on his back or his torso. So there was enough blood that it soaked through his shirt up here. And if this was simply pooling, you wouldn't see the gaps there. It would just...
Really good observation by Lori. I will leave the link in the description below. She was one of the channels, hers was one of the channels I followed during the Karen Reed trial. And I just found her commentary to be logical and excellently analytical. Also, Lori has experience in forensics because of her job. I don't know exactly what she does, but she's used to seeing things like this. And I love that she pointed out that the blood pattern on John O'Keefe's clothing indicated that John O'Keefe was standing upright when he was bleeding. There was a point he was standing upright and bleeding profusely.
Deep. Here's the front of his shirt again, and all those white triangles you see are markers. Again, you see staining here and here in this pattern on the front of his shirt. This man was sitting or standing after he was bleeding. He wasn't laying flat on his back. Now let's have a close look at this damage. I'm sure everybody's already talking about it. These markers are all puncture wounds in that sweater. And I bet you, if you look at Officer O'Keefe's arm and those injuries, all these little puncture wounds are going to match. And look at the patterns. Well, that's a 3. 2, they could be bites, but they can also be punctures from claws. And that is actually where I'm leaning. I've thought all along those were scratches, not necessarily bites. And the damage on the sweater is consistent with a claw. You can see here's a little bit more of a close-up. Let's talk about this fabric and let's talk about directionality. Everyone out there who has done any amount of sewing or making clothes understands how fabric works. And you see this hole? You see this piece of fabric here? That's where something has punctured in and pulled out. It's not just a tear. And the fabric going this way, it shows you the directionality. So the thicker part here is where the thing pulled this way. I don't know if I'm making sense. This here was pulled in that direction. If you look close, this was pulled this way. This I can't tell. These punctures are not from the undercarriage of a car. And this pattern here is from the fabric being wrinkled and sitting on top of itself. So there will be, those gaps would be expected if his shirt was bunched up. But here you see they've marked some damage. There's a close-up of that. And again, that can be a scratch from an animal. Now, because of the shape of it, it could be other things too. And the other thing I noticed,
It's strange too, the pattern to the left of the white triangle kind of looks like a paw print to me. I don't know if you guys see it. You're welcome to comment below if you know what I'm pointing at. it's to the left of the top arrow. There are darker stains. And it could be anything, right? But they seem to be a print of some kind, like a paw print.
Here, see here? There's a hole there, and that damage was not marked. Unless it's a stain, in which case it's still not marked. But that would be a spot where if you're trying to walk away, a dog might grab you. You ever have a dog not want you to leave? So you see in this photo, there's all these different markers, and they're different than those triangles that showed the damage. These are going to be stains. Watch this. So A is not referring to the hole. There's a stain here that you can hardly see, but it's a red-brown stain. These are more clear. B and C, look at these. These are not pooling. These are drops. That requires gravity. And you see that's where they are, B and C up here. Now, this is the pocket of the front of that shirt, and we have two more here. D and E, again, those stains. And again, this isn't pooling. This isn't something that has just seeped along. You know, when you put a paper towel down on some liquid and it soaks it up, this is not that. You don't need to be an expert to see that. This is the t-shirt he was wearing underneath. And you can see on some of it, this is blood that has soaked through, but some of it isn't. See in this top left corner here? This is the back of the shirt. There's quite a bit of blood coming down this way. And these are stains. And I note this here, right above B, is not marked. And I can't say 100%, but it appears to be directional. And these drops may indicate that that sweater he had on was open at the time that those occurred. So when he was found, was his sweater zipped up? It seems to be, because when you look at the pictures, let me find one. When you look at the pictures of his sweater, it's cut straight up like that. There's no reason to cut it up the front if it wasn't closed. And you'll notice this shirt is cut in the same place, same pattern. So it looks like in the ambulance, they just used those shears and cut.
I think Lori may have overlooked that the long sleeve shirt he was wearing, it was hardly a sweater, but it was like a long sleeve shirt he was wearing on top of this orange peach t-shirt. That sweater was a pullover. To my recollection, it was not a zip up, and I feel like that's accurate based on the Waterfall Bar and Grill CCTV footage. In that footage, John O'Keefe is wearing the pullover. It's like a long sleeve pullover, and there is no zipper that I noticed. So I think Lori is assuming there's a zipper, but otherwise, Lori is on point with her analysis here. It's compelling, and when I watched her take on this during the trial, she was like a voice of reason for me. That so much during the trial didn't make sense, didn't add up, it didn't feel right, you know, like your spidey senses go up and you're like, this ain't right, this isn't adding up. And it's the same when you know you're dealing with a liar. Like we all know when we are dealing with someone who's completely full of shit, and we have this desire to just shut them out, to like cut off ties with them because we can't trust them. And that's how I was during the trial. Like, I could not trust anything the prosecution was presenting. I could not trust a single witness the prosecution brought forward. So I relied on these independent YouTube channels like Lori to help me, you know, with some grounding here. Like I can't be the only one seeing this bullshit.
Right up whatever he had on. So this is curious, and it hasn't been explained. D, down here, is another blood drop. You're going to draw your attention up here. Another drop. The jeans. Look at the pattern. So this is a cut mark here, and this is all a cut mark. But there's a pattern here. Again, it goes downward. if this is blood, if it wasn't already there when he put his jeans on, if this is blood, then there's a direction to it. He had to have been upright in order for this to happen. And for all the cuts and tears and these puncture marks in his sweater, the forensic scientist said she can't say what caused those. She was asked about this sleeve in particular and whether or not she used an alternate light source to look for biological fluids, and she said she had. And the reason she did that is because somebody told her that maybe there was a dog bite involved. My question is, would this alternative light source illuminate dog saliva? I don't know the answer to that. In any case, they found none. But if these are scratches, like I think they are, if these were dog claws, then there would be no biological fluids there, and there would be no DNA. As for the swab for the DNA, she said this is the first time she did this sort of collection. She said when she did the swabs, she swabbed the right sleeve, but not a stained area. On other areas of the shirt, she did blood confirmatory tests. She said she received other items from the Norfolk Detective Unit. She received sneakers and clothing, but this is on direct. And Lally does not ask her when she received it, how she received it, who she received it from, nothing. They also took nail clippings and sent them.
Yeah, just completely eliminate the chain of custody, right? Because likely it was shady. Likely the chain of custody wasn't so much a chain of custody, but a planting of evidence. And we know that they were delayed in testing John O'Keefe's clothing. There may have been more patterns of blood on his clothing. For all we know, his clothes were kept somewhere damp. Remember that? They were wet and they were kept somewhere for a while before they were checked. So I'm saying there could have been more evidence on his clothing that would help us better understand what happened to him. There would likely be more evidence, but again, they delayed the inspection, the examination of his clothing. So who knows, guys? You know, the fact that Lori is able to see these blood patterns and these blood stains, and she's able to say confidently that John O'Keefe was standing while he was bleeding, I think we're fortunate enough for that, to be able to tell that much was going on. Because to me, it is likely that the MSP and whoever else was not really investigating, but just throwing a narrative together, they did not provide the full picture. They very well could have manipulated John O'Keefe's clothing. They may have washed off some of the blood, so it was more difficult to determine what happened to him. Again, I don't trust a damn thing the prosecution said or the MSP said.
To her, those photos weren't published and they didn't get into anything about the nail clippings. She said the majority of all this staining that we're seeing was confirmed positive for blood, except for one stain on the t-shirt, which they didn't test because the quantity was limited. They used an alternate light source to check for blood. They looked at several stains and one was positive. This man was standing when he was bleeding. He was not on his back. A blood stain pattern analysis expert could tell you more. A friend of mine is an expert in this area. I might ask him if he'll give me the time and look at these and see if I can tell you any more. There are limits to what I can say because I don't know enough. She said she looked for trace material. She scraped the shirts. She also took took scrapings from unstained material and to look for skin cells. All of that was sent to other units for testing. They talked about the glass on the bumper. Look at this. Isn't this crazy? Look at that big old chunk of glass there. You're telling me that in a blizzard, through being towed, it just sat there? She said they did no testing on the glass itself, but she did take swabs. On cross-examination, Jackson asked her if she was at Canton Police Station in the Sallyport on February 2nd, like she said, or February 1st. And it was February 1st. And in all fairness to her, if I remember correctly, it was leading Lally who said February 1st, not her. February 1st.
I do love that Lori Reese coined Adam Lally leading Lally, because there were so many times she was providing commentary for the trial and she was like, there he is leading again, leading the witness, leading, and if you're a lawyer, you understand that you're not supposed to lead your witnesses. You're not supposed to create a narrative sort of question so that all they have to do is answer yes. They don't have to really think. They don't have to really lie, because Adam Lally already lied in the way he provided the question, a narrative question, and he knows the answer to already. Leading Lally.
Not second that she was there. She said that she was dispatched there by Trooper Proctor, and her understanding was that he was the lead detective on the case. And Jackson asked her about the scratches on the car, and she agreed. She doesn't know how they got there or when they got there. The scratches may or may not have anything to do with the incident, and that holds true for all the other observations of the vehicle. She confirmed she found no tissue or staining, and at the time she was examining the undercarriage of the car, she had not seen any photos of John O'Keefe's arm. They showed her a photo of his arm, and he asked, is this pattern of injuries consistent with anything from the undercarriage of the car? And she said, well, she wouldn't be able to say that. He asked her about the solo cups, and she said she doesn't believe that they were labeled, and she took her swabs from one solo cup. I just about fell off my chair. Her reason for that was she was under the impression that all of those samples in all of those solo cups came from one stain, not multiple stains. DNA testing on the blood from that swab, that one swab from one cup, and DNA testing on all of the other cups was never done. And Jackson pointed out there could have been multiple contributors. And she agreed there could have been. And you know what? We'll never know. Now, in all fairness, it seems
which is true for so many things in this case. There is so much we will never know because it was a cover-up.
Seems unlikely, given that these drops that were collected in these solo cups came from the snow where John was. She confirmed she was not the one who removed the housing for the tail light. She said she took a swab from the tail light in multiple areas, but she only used one swab. And if she's looking for, say, touch DNA, well, you expect John O'Keefe's DNA to be on that vehicle all over it, inside and out. If his blood was on that taillight, well, that would be different. Jackson asked about the pieces of glass that were found on the bumper. They were collected, and instead of being submitted as different items, they were all submitted together as one group. And he asked her, well, how many pieces of glass were there? And she didn't know, and the number was not in her notes. And he asked her about the glass on the bumper and asked her, were any of the pieces embedded into the bumper? And they were not. They were just sitting there. I find it weird that this educated person understands that running certain tests may have limited value because this vehicle had been towed through a blizzard, yet she doesn't question that these pieces of glass are just sitting on the bumper? And Jackson brings up that the vehicle was recovered in Dighton and towed to Canton. So that means after 12:30 a.m. on the 29th, the vehicle was driven around, then it was driven 30 miles to Dighton, and then towed 30 miles back in a blizzard, and somehow this glass just sat there? And what about the hair? He asked about the hair. The hair was on a vertical surface, and he asked, well, how was it secured? And she said it wasn't. And he asked her if it was hard to remove. Did you have to pull it?
Yeah, just just varying degrees of insanity. You know, the fucking Commonwealth brought all of us into their insanity with this so-called case against Karen Read. There was no case against Karen Read. They had nothing on Karen Read. It is clear that they planted the glass, they planted the hair, and they lied about what happened to John O'Keefe. They didn't even care that the blood patterns on his clothing proved that he had been standing at one point.
And she said no, it didn't give any resistance. So he showed pictures of the hair again. And see here, it looks kind of like a backwards C. But then in the next picture, now this is in all fairness from a different angle. So here and then here, it looks like a full C, like it's maybe moved. Like maybe only the tips of the ends are attached to the vehicle and it's not fully attached. And he asked her about it. He showed her 2 zoomed in photos and said, between those 2 photos, did it look to you like the hair had moved? And she said she couldn't tell. Well, the point is, the hair is precariously there, is not in full contact with the vehicle, so the whole thing isn't sort of glued on there. How the heck did that not blow away? And I will ask the same question I asked in the last video, which is, if the hair was able to survive driving 60 miles in a blizzard and then some, if it could survive all that and the snow melting off of the vehicle on top of that, then who's to say it didn't survive days or weeks before when the weather was fine? Jackson went back to the shirt sleeve. Let me find that picture again. And he asked her about the swabs. There were 2 swabs. Do you remember that from the beginning? Well, it turns out she used the swabs together. So she put the 2 swabs together and swabbed the entire area of the sleeve. And he asked her if she had training on keratinized tissue and DNA. And she said no. So you know where he's going. He's going with dog claws. And then he asked her, do you know what keratinized is? And she said no. He moved on to her reports. Her report showed debris collection from the shirts. It turns out that the scrapings done from this gray shirt and the scrapings done from this orange shirt were combined together. What? He asked her if she noted any bits of plastic or anything like that when she was scraping off these shirts to try and get fibers. I mean, if there were any chunks of plastic, surely she would have noticed that, right? Well, she said she didn't. She didn't notice any bits of plastic or anything like that. She said she noticed fibers but she didn't notice anything like plastic. There were no photographs or video of the process of collecting the debris or photos or videos of the debris. Then it comes out that these shirts came in one evidence bag. They came together in one bag. What? The note on the bag that contained the shirts says it was collected by Trooper Proctor on January 29th. It appears this was collected from Good Samaritan Hospital and that it was collected at 1400 hours. So that is 2 o'clock. And that's if I'm reading that correctly, and that it's not 1900. I think it's 1400. She said she has no knowledge about where the shirts were prior to her receiving it. And Jackson asked her if all the evidence was given to her on March 14th, and she said no. She said the taillights and the items from the vehicle she took with her, plus the swabs from the Solo Cup. And Jackson says, so all other items were submitted at the earliest March 14th. Jackson wanted to get into the chain of custody report and the evidence submission report. And it's surprising and irregular that it wasn't the prosecution to introduce these things before we even saw any of this evidence. That chain of custody is really important. So Jackson is going to introduce it now. Well, Lally objected. What? And the judge sustained the objection. So Jackson had to go around the hard way. According to the log, plastic pieces were submitted on March 14th. And they go through several pages like this. Pieces being submitted on March 14th. The t-shirt and that gray shirt wasn't submitted until March 14th. Why? Where were they then? Why were they not submitted immediately? Then Jackson asked this. Was the clothing and the plastic stored in the same bag? And the witness said she couldn't tell from what she has. And, of course, questions aren't evidence, but without that chain of custody report, the question does raise other questions. The fact that Lally objected to having the chain of custody report and the evidence submission log put into evidence, that raises questions. That it took all the way.
Right, because as I've said before, if you follow enough court cases like I have over the years, usually the prosecution is thorough in presenting the evidence and presenting the chain of custody and verifying when that evidence was entered, what was done with that evidence. It's gruesome what these examinations require. It's tedious. They have to do so much. They have to document everything. They can't leave anything up to question because the prosecution's case is dependent. It's reliant on the evidence and the ability to prove the chain of custody for the evidence so that no one can ever say somebody messed with the evidence. But in the Karen Read case, we can't ever say that about the prosecution. We can't ever say there's definitely no way somebody messed with the evidence. We will never have certainty with respect to the evidence in the Karen Read case. She didn't get John's clothing until March. John died on January 29th. Like, holy shit. Why did it take so long? And it proves my point from earlier. Like, who the hell knows what they did with John's clothing? There may have been far more evidence on his clothing detailing what happened to him. But again, we will never know because this was not a real case against Karen Read. This was not a real prosecution against someone. This was a kangaroo court. This was a staged cover-up, a staged thing. And Karen Read fell victim to it. This was a group of officers helping another group of officers from dealing with the consequences of what they did to another officer, John O'Keefe. And they pinned it on Karen Read. It's so clear that when you watch the trial, it was never actually a real trial. The prosecution did not behave like a real prosecution. It was a joke. It was a circus. And despite it being a joke and being a circus, there were real victims here. The narrative was false. The narrative was fake. But because of the narrative, there were real victims here.
Till March 14th for this evidence to be sent at all is shocking. What logical reason would they have to not submit that? And as for Lally not wanting this in and how he glossed over it, he's been glossing over all of this from the beginning. It's disappointing. You would expect a prosecutor to want this admitted. And if there are warts in the prosecution's case, because look, the lawyers don't make the facts, they just argue them, right? And as a prosecutor, you're not going to get something that's perfect, that has no flaws, no warts. If there are warts, it would be better for Lally to say, yep, here's where there was a mistake, but this other evidence over here proves what this would have, or make some other argument to cover the holes, to make it better, and to be honest and say, yep, our case has warts. Here they are. The prosecution is supposed to be working for the people, and it is not in the interest of the people to cover up and hide investigations that aren't done properly. You can't fix something if you keep it in the dark and hide it. It's not in the people's interest to convict somebody who might not be guilty. It's not in the people's best interest to allow authorities to do whatever the crap they want and accuse who they want and get away with sending somebody to jail on crap evidence and crap process. On redirect, Lally asked if there was any snow or ice on the SUV when she examined it. She said no. The next witness was Ashley Valier. She's a forensic scientist, has been for 5 years. She works in trace arson and explosives. They go through all her qualifications. Lally asked this question. He says, at some point, you became involved. Why doesn't he just give the date? Why does he insist on being vague here? There's no reason for that. And then he said, and you later received debris from clothing items. And the answer was yes. Well, if this was a suspect being questioned and the suspect is saying at some point and sometime later, well, an investigator would be drilling down on that, because why are you being vague? And don't tell me that this is just lawyer speak, because it isn't. Don't look behind the curtain. She said she received debris from the jeans, boxers, sneakers, and 2 shirts. And I don't recall the last witness saying anything about boxers or talking about doing debris removal from sneakers. I mean, I could have missed something. And she said she got debris from the shirts, and with her naked eye, she could see dirt, fibers, hairs, red plastic, and clear plastic. And the clear plastic that she saw was 1/8 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch. That is big. How did the previous scientist miss that? And she was asked, did you notice anything? And she said, no. How could she not notice something that was 1/8 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch? And you know what? As it scraped off, it would have made a noise. Then Lally asked about other items from Fairview. Again, not saying who collected them or how or when, just their other items from Fairview. She said, yes, many plastic pieces, some glass, 1 drinking straw. What? And he goes through photos. He shows a photo of an evidence envelope, and the date there is 2/4/22, and it's the same date on the barcode here, and this is for broken glass. This says 2/9/23. Someone's going to have to explain that to me. Maybe that's when it was tested. Here's an evidence envelope saying it was collected from Fairview. But look, 2/10/22 at 9:45 a.m. And Lally asked her about the dates on the bag, the barcodes and everything. And she said, well, I can't answer that because that is not our labeling system. Here's one, 2/11/22 at 9 a.m. from Fairview. Here's one, 2/10. Here's one, 2/10, looks like 22 at 9:15 a.m. 2/8/22 at noon. A large.
And if you're reading the evidence bag so far, they keep reading Proctor and Buchanan. So the fact that the dates don't line up and are a bit confusing is not surprising. Trooper Proctor and Trooper Buchanan.
Large piece of plastic, again at Fairview, and it says on the front lawn. And look at this thing. This is, let's see, that's 9 centimeters, and I bet you that's another 2, so 10 or 11 centimeters in length for this one piece of red plastic. So it was leaf blown all the way down, they said, and then the other guys searched, and they still didn't find this? 2/11/22 at 9 a.m., 3 pieces of clear plastic and 5 pieces of red plastic found at Fairview. Look at this. Come on. Look at this. It's giant. 2 searches and they missed that? This is all collected on different dates, much after the incident, and none of that was collected by Lieutenant O'Hara and his team or the original team who was out there, Lieutenant Gallagher. And as Lally goes through this to try and get this evidence in, he's just flying through all of these envelopes with all of these different dates on them. And it all looks very official and forensic science-y. And I think it's misleading. And again, I'm going to say, if a person who was accused did this, sort of glossing over, trying to slip something by, you would view it as an omission, as a misdirection. It may well be misleading in the absence of setting a foundation and the chain of custody. This is misleading. People might think that all of this was found by the CERT team or that it was found earlier or all at once, but it wasn't. And so all of this evidence is coming in, and we still don't know where the heck it came from. Who found?
Really good. It's an excellent video by Lori. I would play more, but I would just leave the link in the description below, and you are welcome to check it out yourself. And please check out her other videos pertaining to the Karen Read case. She has playlists, and one of them is titled Karen Read. Just really good. And I thank her for her commentary. And we need more people like Lori. We need more people who can think critically and analyze information critically. And to say things like, what? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Thank you. Yes, it doesn't make any sense. It was a cover-up. And Judge Bev never intervened, despite the information being conveyed, being like rather vague. But despite the chain of custody being confusing and the dates being confusing, like Judge Bev herself had the authority during trial to ask these questions as well. Because, judges sometimes also want to know the truth. I've seen it happen. I've seen judges butt in and say, do you know when that was collected? Do you know who gave you that? And it doesn't even have to be a lawyer asking a question. So I'm saying, like, Judge Bev sat through this trial and not once intervened when Adam Lally was being vague and was not behaving like a prosecutor. And she supported Adam Lally whenever he would object. She consistently supported him by sustaining his objections, even though his objections to me were often corrupt in nature. Just like Lori pointed out, they were an attempt to omit. The defense team in the Karen Reed case were the real prosecutors. They were the ones truly out for the best interest of the people. Crazy how the roles were reversed in the Karen Reed case. Can't trust a damn thing the prosecution said. But thank goodness for that defense team. Thank goodness. Thank you for watching.